Hi guys, thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode of Real World Basics. Today we are going to continue talking about job hunting, and you have landed an interview. Today's video is going to go through the different elements of an interview and all the different ways that you can prepare for it so that you ace your interview. So it's totally okay to be nervous or anxious for an interview. And once you do enough of them, you'll actually see a similar pattern emerge and you get better at it each time. So before we start talking about ways you can prepare for interview questions, you want to understand what your rights are as an interviewee. There are so many nuances into like legal hiring practices. So I've included some resources with today's video to help you learn more about that. So those resources that I'm including are in no way an exhaustive list, or are they intended to serve as like legal counsel, but they will give you a good starting base for understanding how a legal hiring procedure works. So basically what it boils down to is during an interview, the only questions that should be asked are those that pertain to your ability to perform the job responsibilities. These job responsibilities should be clearly outlined during an interview so that you understand exactly what you're supposed to be doing, as well as understanding how any questions that are asked of you relate back to the job. So this is to ensure that there's no discrimination during job interviews. Unfortunately, this doesn't stop people from asking questions that could encourage discrimination. So for example, I've been asked during past job interviews about like outside family commitments and whether or not I have children. And those questions were all totally unrelated to the jobs that I was applying for. And because the jobs then once hired, they pushed me for like 14-hour days and they frequently pushed me into overtime. I believe that they asked those questions to push out any potential job candidates that had family commitments or more firm time boundaries. So because I didn't know any of these legal hiring practices at the time, I just answered truthfully and said no. But if I could go back, I would have liked to have stood up for myself more and maybe asked something like, I'm sorry, I'm unsure as to how that relates to the position. Can you explain? Or is that relevant to the position I'm being interviewed for? So sometimes no harm is meant by those questions. And then like that little reminder question will kind of help remind them of the boundaries that are in place, and it'll like get you guys back on track. But other times it will just be very clear that they know what they're asking is inappropriate and illegal. And when this does happen, you do have a few options. So you can answer truthfully in whichever way it goes and see where that takes you. You can give them the answer that you know they're looking for, or you can remain firm on not answering that question because it doesn't relate to the job. But you got to ask yourself if you really want to work for or with a company that is blatantly discriminating and or violating legal hiring practices, because that could carry over into other day-to-day functions. So this is also a great time if you need reasonable accommodations to perform the job responsibilities, to mention that and go into the interview with like even if it's a broad idea, give them an idea of what you think those reasonable accommodations would look like. So definitely check out the resources that we have with today's videos. Those will give you a lot more information about the legal and hiring practices. So once you're actually in an interview, there's three main parts of it that you can expect. They will, of course, vary depending on like what the position is, what field it's in. But they're going to start with a review, and they're going to go over your application, the position, the company. When they go over your application, that's going to include like your resume, your work and volunteer experience, other history, your skills and abilities, your references, your cover letter. Maybe they made you take like quiz or a test. They'll go over all of that. And, that's usually where you explain how your past experience is relevant to the job you're applying for. And you really want to try to emphasize those like core employee skills, like customer service, like IT troubleshooting, any hard or soft skills, definitely play those up and just bring it all back to the main point of how you are a good fit for the position. And even if you don't have all of the qualifications, try to do some research into what you're missing. So take some steps prior to your interview to familiarize yourself with the position and industry before you actually get in there so that you aren't lost during the interview. You don't want to get like hung up on like terminology or like what sort of software they use. At least knowing the names of things before you get in there will go a really long way. And then explain how you're working to meet those qualifications if you don't currently, or how you bring something else totally new to the table. This is also an opportunity to explain any gaps in your employment or like reasons you left a previous job. A note on that is no matter how badly your last job ended, do not badmouth your past employer in a job interview. It looks really bad. So just leave all of your answers professional and try not to encourage that energy to follow you into your interview. Just say like personal reasons or blame school or something like that. And hopefully you were able to do some research on the position and company prior to the interview. This will help prepare you so you can ask like specific and more individualized questions regarding the company. They're then going to ask open-ended questions, and there are some that are like really standard and generic, like how do you handle an upset customer, or what are your strengths and weaknesses? So these questions should be expected, and they are the easiest ones to answer because of that. Know how you plan to answer them in advance, and maybe try to avoid cliche answers that don't actually answer the question. For example, maybe they ask you, what is your biggest weakness? You could say, I'm a perfectionist, but that doesn't actually answer the question of how it's a weakness or like how that pertains to you. That doesn't give them any information about you. You could instead maybe say, I have difficulty delegating responsibilities to other coworkers. And that shows like you actually have an answer that is specific to you, and it gives them more information about you, and it shows that you're self-aware. Also going along with today's video, I have included some links to sample interview Q&A resources. So there are so many potential questions that could be asked, especially once you move away from the like standard generic ones into more industry specific questions. So try to rehearse beforehand so that you know what you want to say during the interview, and that during the interview your words come out right. And don't be afraid to ask for time, maybe clarification on something, and maybe put some ideas out there. Work isn't like school where like when you take a test, you don't get to have any of your books or resources with you. When you're working, you are constantly consulting your resources, notes, coworkers, all that. And the interviewer basically wants to see if you can answer questions like a functional human being and think on your feet. And finally, in an interview, you ask questions. So this is your opportunity to ask about things that popped up during maybe the application process or during the interview. Asking about like compensation, scheduling, dress codes, stuff like that is pretty standard and will probably be mentioned at some point during the interview, but if not, this is your chance to ask. And remember when you're asking questions that you are not just interviewing for a position, you are interviewing them as an employer. Ask about things like training, how employees are evaluated, what the company's future goals are, advancement opportunities within the company, because you also need to think about yourself. So when asking questions, remember that if you don't ask questions, you might not stand out as an interviewee, but more importantly, you may miss a big flag, be it a red flag or a green flag about the position and company. So that just helps you ensure that it's a good fit for you. And you always want to ask if there are any questions about your resume or your experience, because this gives you an opportunity to address any concerns then and there for this position, but also you can use that information for any future interviews. So some additional advice I have to pass on regarding job interviews, show up early, but not too early. You want to aim for like 10 minutes early. And if you're like me and you are either like super early or super late and there's literally no in between, get there early. And don't park right in front of the building, because then they can just see you sitting in your car for a really long time and they're wondering like, who is this person? What are they doing? And then when you get out for an interview, they're kind of confused. So scope them out, do a drive-by, park out of view, and then go in when it's time. Also, be nice to the first employees you meet. If you are rude to a frontline employee, or you're rude to a receptionist, or you've got an attitude, that will get back to the hiring manager, and that is considered during hiring practices. And if you're running late, call them as soon as you know you're going to be late. Most people are really understanding and they will accommodate you if you can give them advance notice, and just try to be apologetic. And unfortunately though, if they're not able to accommodate you, it happens. So just keep it moving. And hiring can take some time. So during your interview, ask for a time frame as to when they think a decision will be made, when callbacks are, things like that. And then understand that they're probably super busy and sometimes some stuff falls through, and give them a day or two after that time frame before you follow up about the position's status. So serious job hunting is a job in itself. I know applications take forever to fill out, even when you've already attached your resume. I know that's super frustrating. And writing a slightly different cover letter for each position you apply for takes up way too much time. And it's also really discouraging to not hear back from people when you keep applying. But you just have to keep on grinding and know that your efforts will eventually come to fruition. You just have to keep on working at it. So today's video wraps up our discussion on job hunting. Next week, we are going to start a new segment on staying healthy, starting with fitness basics. So as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and don't hesitate to reach out to the Manassas Park City Library if you have any questions about today's video, or maybe if you have any suggestions for topics you'd like to see covered in upcoming real world basics videos. I will see you guys next week. Bye.